Good afternoon, and welcome to the special school board meeting of November the 16th at 4 o'clock. If you would rise for a moment of silence and the pledge. Thank you very much for being here today. The first item is public input, and I only have one card. Yes. Mr. Tibbetts.
Good afternoon, Stephen Tibbetts. Thank you for the time to speak with you. I just want to comment on some observations over last week's meeting and subsequent events relative to the compensation package that you approved for the upper level administrators at the last meeting. First of all, thank you for, after 7 years, finally giving these people who have worked so hard a much overdue raise, in spite of what Miss Ritchie has said in the newspaper. I sat there reading her article the other day and said she was obviously at a different meeting than I was at, or has access to different numbers, because what I've been seeing you doing and the efforts you're making and reading her criticisms, I would hope that there is a response scheduled soon from the board. In regard to the meeting last week, there were some interesting comments along the way talking about during the economic recession, and Mr. Matthias talked about his staff having to pull back and work less. And I would presume in his instance that was because business was less. However, for the administrators and teachers during the same period of time, guess what? There were more students, there were more regulations, there were more government interventions that made their jobs harder, hours longer, and obviously totally different than a workplace where there wasn't as much work and therefore there had to be cutbacks. Finally, there was comment made about we're still lacking 2 chief administrators. And I think that the board has to bear some of the responsibility for that. Not only are people out there looking at these positions that are open saying, well, they just went 6 or 7 years without a raise, but then the board that's going to be in charge of us told my boss if she wanted to keep working, she would have to take a 5% cut in pay. That is not the kind of policies that is going to attract qualified people to do the work that all of you know so desperately she needs help with. So please understand that I don't think there's going to be a big long line if people who are ready for these jobs are looking at what they can make in other school districts. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tibbetts. Dr. Moxley?
Yes, good afternoon, board members and members of the public. Thank you very much for being here this afternoon. Our agenda this afternoon has 2 workshop items that are for discussion, either updates or discussion, and 3 actionable items based on past board meetings we had talked about our resolution. We have an interlocal agreement, and we wanted to bring back the strategic priorities document that you had made some corrections to. So at this time, we're ready to proceed with the first 2 items that are for non-action today.
Okay, Mr. Matthias?
Okay. If we could, Kurt, would you come forward, and Tom? That way y'all are part of this whole workshop thing. Kumbaya. So I'll begin, and then you jump in here amongst us. Board members, what I want to do is we'll be referring to policy 7.61, which is really the internal audit charter and its scope and direction. But I also want to bring up, first and foremost, Florida Statute 1.1.42, paragraph 12, subparagraph L, which is the internal, this is by statute what Tom's responsibility is. It says, well, it doesn't say that, but I'm going to add that part, may employ an internal auditor to perform ongoing financial verification of the financial records of the school district. The internal auditor shall report directly to the district school board or its designee. M goes into 11.45, goes into some process auditing components. However, those are legislative, not at the school board district. Very important. So as you read our policy, a long time ago, someone told me that if you really want the meaning of a Chinese fortune cookie, after you open it, you just add the word, read what it says, and then add under the sheets, and it will bring total vision. And in this case, anything you read, at the end of it, just remember financial verification. That's what's critical. So we had a meeting. Tom established his risk assessment, and it was obviously distributed to us. And he identified at the last one that you were going to go into curriculum, right? And then it was added. What was the other part that was added?
Teaching and learning.
Teaching and learning. Those two components. If we kept focused on the financial verification, it would be fine. But if we move into curriculum and process, then we're getting outside of the scope. And so it's important that we all understand the limits of direction, and that moving forward, I think that in the meeting that Mr. Benny was at, and Tom, and Superintendent, and Carol, is that really once there's a risk identified, then that Tom would then prepare what he is going to audit, and that would go before the audit committee, and then would come to us for approval in the future. And that way, we're all identifying what that financial component is that we're really verifying. Is that about right?
Do you want me to respond to that?
Yes, and you're
Yeah,
going to
yeah.
need, Mr. Benny, you're going to, and he's the
Okay.
chairman of the audit committee,
Yep.
and Mr. Matthias is the liaison from the board to the audit committee.
Thank you. Again, I'm Kurt Benny, Audit Committee Chairman. Couple points that I just want to rehash is what we're talking about is two different types of auditing here. We're talking about financial verification auditing, which is your conventional audit, which district gets audited every year. Your foundation gets audited every year. And that's basically going in and making sure that the numbers are right and you're in compliance. The other thing is, and you've seen that in some of Mr. Mock's audits, is performance-related auditing. Going in, looking how you're functioning, and looking for ways to improve. And you can do some of both in conjunction with each other. And Mr. Johnson, we've had this conversation for years, that as a district auditor, based on the statute that Mr. Matthias referenced, you can do a financial audit, and in conjunction with that, you can do some performance auditing. And we did that with maintenance, we did that with transportation, we did that with inventory control. You can also do performance auditing if, as allowed by the policy, it's in conjunction with the superintendent, because there is this line where the financial auditor isn't really qualified to do certain things. And I'm not just talking about him specifically, I'm talking about financial auditors in general. If you were to ask me, and I've been an auditor for almost 30 years, to go in and look at Dr. Moxley's curriculum, I'd say, sure, how do I do it? Okay? And I would, and when we say we're going to look at curriculum, Ms. Luke, how long would it take Tom, if he was experienced, to look at the curriculum in the school district? 1, 2, 3 years? Come out with a document this thick? So what Mr. Matthias is saying is that when the board wants a specific area looked at, our conversation was that Mr. Mock should go in, learn about that area, not audit it, let the district know, I'm to learn about it, I'm going to come up with a scope, and then bring it to the audit committee. We might narrow that scope a little bit, and then come back with a document for your review that says, based on my understanding of what you wanted and my understanding of the subject area, this is what I think needs to be looked at, and this is how I would do it. Otherwise, you get this sort of open-ended, unguided missile type of audit that goes in there that nobody really knows what you're doing. The auditees can have some undue concerns. And you may not, in the end, get what you're looking for anyway. So the audit committee probably hasn't done as good a job as we could as maybe managing that, because I don't think we've given you the information you need to say that, because we work for you. That's what we want you to do. This is a resource. This is no different than going out and hiring RSM or Cinero or somebody like that. We're going to spend X amount of money in his hours to look at an area. Let's make sure we're as efficient as we can, and we're going to get the right result. And the other thing we need to look at is, are we using the right tool for that? I.e., we just did a technology scope audit, and we hired an external person because that was the best person for the job. We did a maintenance audit, and Tom was totally qualified to do that. We did an audit of Eustis Heights. Tom did an awesome job on that, and you saw the results. He came back. That was actually an audit, right? He looked at all of the, he looked at all of the paperwork. He looked at the contracts. He came back, and he was able to do a financial audit and also make recommendations. That's the best case scenario in that. The performance stuff really isn't, and I want to just talk about a term for a minute, audit. Okay. When Tom goes in and he looks at maintenance, he's not really auditing maintenance. He's going in and he's doing a performance review. He's looking at your functions, your operations, your SOPs, and making recommendations. And jump in here if I'm talking too much. So
I had some more to say.
No.
Like he was looking at my notes
Yeah.
over here.
When he takes a breath, I'll jump in.
I'm trying to keep you from jumping in. No. And I have to make one comment, Mr. Mathias. I haven't heard anybody use the term double aught since Jethro Bodine, by the way.
Wow.
But anyway, yes, I am showing my age. So I think, I'm not sure what happened in the last meeting or whatever, but I believe that we as an audit committee, being your representatives, can do a better job of helping to manage this for you. And we need to do, I think, better processes internally to get you better processes within the district. And with that, sir?
Well, actually, I took you off your game because he was speaking about the word audit versus then what is really happening when he's looking at
Performance review.
that the word review is probably more appropriate, and recommendations would come rather than it being an audit statement. So I think that moving forward, maybe we lose that process audit component and we use process review or something like that. That's actually more applicable to what we're really doing.
And just to give you one example of what we're talking about, when we look at things like teaching or curriculum, we do have a place to start. We can narrow our scope, and we talked about this with the superintendent last week, and that is you have a audit of virtual schools that came from the Auditor General. And those were a bunch of recommendations and a bunch of subject areas that needed to be looked at, followed up, and improved. Those type of things would be prime for the internal auditor to follow up on and to try to make those kind of adjustments, recommendations, and then to follow with the board. The other thing is that came out of our meeting is maybe we're trying, I think we might be trying to do too much new stuff in a given time period when we have a ton of old stuff out there that we don't know that we're following up on and that it's getting corrected. Now, everything that happens, whether it's a Purvis Gray audit, whether it's an Auditor General audit, whether it's a Title I audit, that I all come to one woman and she's responsible for implementation of the corrective action. Okay, then she counts on her department heads to do that for her, and then you're counting on her to follow up, to come up to you to say that these have been corrected. But how do we know that a lot of this stuff? The running joke in the audit world is, you just paid $25,000 for a really nice audit that's going to collect dust on a shelf. Now that's what we don't want. That's what we were pushing the former auditor to come up with a listing of it. We didn't have a list for a long time of what these corrective actions were and where they are, and how we're going to address them. You know, things like payroll. Payroll was an issue for a long time, but we knew it wasn't going to get corrected until we got Skyward on board and things like that. But now, as we move forward, I heard, you know, and those type of things. You know, so there needs to be some type of follow-up on that too, and maybe not so much just looking for new stuff to follow in, but following up on the old stuff and learning the environment, the population that we're in, and looking for where the real risk is. As the system is now, when he does his risk assessment, he gets input from the superintendent and her executive cabinet, and that's really the driver for when he comes to you with, this is what I want to audit. But maybe we need to do a better job of going into those risk areas and drilling into them to see, okay, well, we think that teaching might be an issue, but what in teaching? You know, obviously, when teaching is what you do for a living, there's risk there. We know that, right? But you know, we could spend 5 auditors, 5 years worth and go through everything, or we could drill down into where the real risk area is and then come back and say, this is what we think we need to look at. It's kind of like we did with the technology audit. You know, we know technology is huge here. But what are the risks? So that's why we hired a professional to come in and say, these are our risks, these are the areas we need to look at, and I believe you've all been briefed on that. So,
He covered all my
He
points.
covered all of yours? Maybe he was reading off of it
That's
while
what
he was
I
gone.
said.
no, you haven't seen his handwriting.
I hadn't.
Yes, I have.
I know, it's printing?
It's very nice, he said.
Any comments from the board?
My question would be, going back to, and Dr. Moxley, I looked at this afternoon, you presented the 15-16 audit plan. Inside that plan, you did the risk assessment first, and then you had the list of the what do we call it, the audit universe, where all the departments fell into the audit universe, and then you pulled out the ones that you were going to do for 15-16. Should we look at that list again now that we have the direction to drill down so that we know where we should?
Yeah, my thought is we have an audit committee meeting coming up in 2 weeks, roughly.
2 or 3.
And to readdress that with them and then
That'd be
drill
great.
in to see, you know, is where we're heading with this the right direction, or should we pick up? Because I'm hearing, obviously, we need to look at this a little bit further, discuss what we have on here. It sounds like some of it's good, but there's other pieces that we need a little bit more
Okay, and you need more
discussion on.
detail in it so that we know exactly what the scope of work actually is, correct?
Correct.
And one thing I would encourage for board members is to use your audit committee member, talk to them before that meeting, and let them know what your thoughts are, so when they come to the meeting, they are your surrogate. And so we can make a decision that, we know that when we come to you, you're already, is what you want, as opposed to coming up and then we have to rework it and then go back and redo it. And we do need to redo relook at the risk assessment. Again, the risk assessment is just an idea. So we need to drill down to that and say, what is the most efficient use of the one resource you have right now, which is one auditor, and and then the external auditor funds that you've allocated us in your budget.
Okay. And I did attend the last one because Mr. Mathias wasn't there, and I may not have given you the right impression if you thought I was okay with what was going on. I don't remember the meeting, so I can't tell you, but if I did, Kurt, I'm sorry.
Well, I just was under the impression that what the audit that he was proceeding with was what the board wanted, and that there had been communication between management and the auditor. And once that happens, then the audit committee is going to obviously go with what the board decides. So
Right.
it may have been a misunderstanding on my part,
Okay.
too.
I've got, I guess, a question in how this district is going to approach this going forward, because if Tom's focus is more limited to purely just the financial records as the statute speaks to, then I'm concerned of the value that we would lose in terms of the absence of the process or the performance reviews. And one of the things that I think he's got great value in is having that outsider perspective. And he and I had a conversation last week, and I related a story when I worked at Disney. At one point, they had me writing boat safety procedures, and I said, really, me? I've never even driven a boat. Why am I qualified to do this? And they were really looking for that outsider perspective. And then I worked closely with a boat manager who had been doing it for a decade, and we together developed some great processes that are now used at parks all over the world. So I'm concerned about losing that value. So how do we approach that going forward to continue to get that outsider perspective in the process and in the performance reviews, so that way we as a board can become more aware of the challenges facing this district, so we can appropriately react to those and allocate appropriately to help out and fix those.
Dr. Moxley, you and Mr. Johnson want to chime in on that?
Can I?
For just one second, and just one
I
second.
think we have a couple perspectives.
Just that when we met, and because Tom is from the outside, a natural part is him learning.
Bless you.
And that as he is learning, just like you did with the boat safety, is he's going to note things that may seem out of the ordinary. And that's where we started talking about process review versus it being an audit, because he should bring those to the superintendent's
Correct.
attention. But it's not an audit. Does that kind of make sense? That
Oh,
it's,
sure.
that I believe that having that outside set of eyes that's never done things is positive. And that he's really drilling down, and he's going to pick up information that's outside of his scope, and he shares that as a review, but it doesn't become part of the audit, if that
Right.
makes sense.
Right.
So really, his work doesn't change, it's just how it's presented then. Do we still get that information on that performance review? Oh,
It's not
Yeah, let me
There's a
necessarily
cringe.
real quick.
true.
okay.
I just want to expand on, and just to be clear on what I'm saying, and I'm not speaking towards what the statute says, that's a legal issue, but keep in mind that this is a district that has an appointed superintendent and an elected board. Prior to Dr. Moxley, we had an elected superintendent and an elected board. So there is a statute out there that sort of gives a legal wall between two elected bodies, so that one elected body doesn't have the right to run roughshod over the other one. Well, that statute does, if I'm not misspeaking, does not delineate between whether you're appointed or elected. It just says what it says. So what I'm not saying that Tom can't do some of the things that you're saying, and he's very good at that. So I don't want to misuse a resource. All I'm saying is that, A, we have a limited resource. Okay, and in his capacity as a financial auditor, we need to use that as best we can for that role. But if there is an issue that the board feels needs to be addressed, and the superintendent concurs, and we are not, to my knowledge, trust me, I've been here, as I said earlier, prior administrations, we were like this. We don't seem to be like that now, where she has, to my knowledge, she has not interfered with any audit since I've been here, and I've been here longer than her. So that's not the issue. So if there is a thing where you need to bring someone in to look at a performance review, and Dr. Moxley wants something looked at, to me, and that again with the legal counsel's purview, you could do that. You just have to be careful on the scope that you narrow it, and you specifically document that it's not violating the law. No, one thing, and the other thing is that. In the scope of his duties, if he sees something that he thinks should improve the district, and he's done this every time we've asked him to do anything, he does go above and beyond the just financial role to look at how can I make this district better. Because when we had, I'll give you a little honest, when we had this conversation last week and we said, well, you're more of a financial auditor than a performance auditor, that didn't sit well with him, because he wants to make this district better. Those of us that are in the compliance world, we do our audit, we give our report, and we leave. Tom wants to leave it better than when he started, and I salute him for that. So you're going to get that from Tom, regardless of what you put him in there. It's just we got to be better at telling him what we want him to do, so that there's no confusion about what he's trying to do, and staff understands when he's coming in, and the board knows what he's doing for, the audit committee knows what he's doing, and I'll let you talk.
No.
See, that still doesn't answer Mark's
May I-
question.
may I?
Go ahead.
Okay. I think that Mr. Benny highlighted a little bit of this in some of his comments, because when Mr. Mock did the transportation audit, did the maintenance audit, it wasn't all financial verification. It was performance and that. And I fully supported that. So there is great value in that. I think there are some areas that the performance review or the process audit may, just like we make decisions, this is something we outsource. This is one that's done in-house. You have a combination. I mean, we have auditors in here all the time. In fact, there were times when we had two different audit groups in here, and we had no space to house them. So we're not, it's not foreign for us to have multiple auditors in here at one time. So it is not a situation where we don't want auditors in here. The question is, who is best to do the audit, be it operational, be it performance, be it financial verification, to do that with the greatest expertise? For example, we have the program evaluation and innovation team. I mean, I have 2 staff people here on staff that are doing program evaluation, and they're also working, and they're working on the academic side of the house with program process improvement. How are we measuring things? How do we know that when we have done this program or this software initiative or whatever it is, it had positive impact on instruction? And everything isn't just about $1. I mean, everything isn't just about counting, well, you spent X number of dollars. What did you get for that? Sometimes you spend X number of dollars and you don't get the positive return on that investment. Other times you spend this amount of money and you get a huge positive impact that is qualitative in addition to quantitative. So all of those things have to be put into perspective. And so, for example, looking at standards-based instruction, the new teacher project, they did a whole statewide thing. I think I shared it with some of you. We now are doing some additional work that's customized for our district. Well, Mr. Mock doesn't need to do that. I mean, that I got paid for through grant dollars. So why would we use and double up on that? That's what I'm talking about. We don't need to have duplicate work. And it's not that we're not going to do it. We're going to do it. We just need to say who's doing it and how is it being done and how are we measuring it. Mark?
So we're still getting that performance review, and but it just won't be called an audit anymore. That doesn't change then.
It is a performance review.
And
And in some of
and when
his,
he has observations out there in the field, we're still going to get those. It's just not going to be called an audit anymore.
he's going,
I don't think he's gonna
No,
get
he's
those.
not getting.
I'm not
You're
going to
not
get
gonna
that.
Well, you're going to get what you want, which is a look at a certain subject
Right.
area. It may not be by Tom, it may be by either a staff member or an outside consultant. And but that's up to you as an elected body to decide who you want to do that through a public discussion.
and that's why I think that statement of work is so important, that we know exactly what's being looked at, what part of it is process, what part of it is financial verification. And for example, you did get the performance review for maintenance and transportation. That came to you.
Right.
And if we hadn't done those and we were starting those now, I would be the first one to say, absolutely, those need to be done and come.
But
Yeah.
within the maintenance and the transportation, which were process reviews, now the expectation is that we would begin to audit to see that what he said was happening would happen.
Right.
That's kind of my.
Someone has to go back
And
do
that's
that.
looking at implementation.
The follow-up is. to
But be
keep-
clear, you're making a good point, because when I go in now, or the way I've been doing it, I'm sharing all my observations, whether they be fully audited or be observations.
Yeah.
So what they're saying now is stick to the audit, the scope of work, my observations, come back and share, but you're not gonna share. I'm gonna share them with Dr. Moxley
That's
and
not
say,
necessarily
these
so
are some
either.
of the no, they're not,
No.
they're
That's
not
not
in
what
the
we're
scope
saying.
of the work. They're not in the scope of the work, so I cannot.
We're,
Well, yeah.
we are going to be approving the scope of the work.
Okay,
The board is.
okay. So if
And
I'm
you-
out doing the work now and I see some things that could be improved,
You
I'm
go to-
gonna
You
come
owe
back
it to
and
them to do
share.
that.
I'm gonna
Yeah,
come back and share, right?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Now, do you want me to share that with them as well? Because they may be observations for how I see things and how they
If
could
they're
be-
outside of the scope of the work,
They would be outside of, that's what I'm talking about.
I mean, you know, again, and now we're getting into all kinds of semantics of
Again,
what's
like I
out.
said, under the sheets, if it doesn't have a
Right.
financial component to it, then it is outside
Right,
of
and
your.
that's where,
So-
that's
so-
what I'm talking about.
right,
You're not gonna get
that's
that.
the
And
question.
that's
So
what he
I'm
was
not
just
gonna get
asking.
that.
That's what I heard him ask me.
Okay, Kurt.
He has
Okay.
understood the question
Well,
perfectly.
and no, but this is a very good
Fine.
discussion because this really needs to go to how we do our business. And that is, for example, if we ask Tom to go and follow up on the virtual school, okay? So he goes out, he does his due diligence, he follows up with the comments, and looks at the auditor's findings from a financial perspective, and he can follow up on some of their non-financial follows, you know, because it's already from an audit, if that's what you choose. And he finds something else. Here's the way I think it should work, okay?
Put it on a flow chart for me.
It's very simple.
Okay.
Tom comes up with a list of 10 comments, and this is similar to when the Auditor General met with us with their initial comments. He comes to Dr., because he doesn't know everything, okay? He comes to Dr. Moxley and says, I've got these 10 comments that relate to this audit, okay? She may have a legitimate reason that says 1 and 2 are invalid, and here's why. Correct? Just for whatever reason. They don't apply. She's got other people that are looking at it. He misinterpreted what he was told. His sample wasn't the right size. There's a myriad of reasons. So she disagrees with 1 and 2. 3, 4, and 5, she thinks they're great. She wants, you to move forward with those recommendations. 5, 6, and 7, she may have a little bit of disagreement with, but then the question becomes a management question of how much of that gets put in the public document, how much of that gets brought to the board.
Right.
Okay. There's no good answer to that other than he has to have a good understanding of what you all want. And then he understands that if he feels so strongly that comment number 4 needs to come to you, then,
It comes to you.
then it comes to you.
Yeah.
I mean, the superintendent, he doesn't work for the superintendent. He works through the audit committee for the board. But he has to understand what you want and how you want him to do his job. He's your only other employee. You're his boss. So if you want him to bring every single thing he finds to you, that's fine. If you want him to work with the superintendent in the things that he feels are clearly immaterial but might be improvements, then sometimes that's the best way to handle them. And we can have a discussion about that audit committee. Audit committee members can bring it to you. It's how you all feel that it should be handled as a board. I mean, I don't know that I can be any more
Yeah.
cryptic than that, but
Pretty clear.
it is.
I think the other thing too is, and I think this is the difference too in the governance model that we have, is that as a board, you say, we want a performance review of this department. You can direct and say, and I want you to go do a performance review, and I will go out and secure who is qualified to do that, and I will bring back, and you say, we're going to fund this review. I mean, we have done that too. Class size is the primary example, and Mr. Benny was the independent person that assisted with that. But that was the same thing. I mean, we called for an independent review. And so there are many things like that come.
The bottom line is that the district auditor works for you, okay? And I've had
As a
numerous
whole.
conversations with him, and he knows that. And I think that each and every one of you, if you haven't had an individual conversation with him so that he understands where you're coming from, I would encourage you to do that so that he understands where his 5 bosses that you want him to do his job. The one thing we did learn from this exercise last week was that we may not be doing a very good job of being top-down directive as far as timing of some of these things because we don't know what's going on. As Dr. Moxley said, they may have 2 or 3 different auditors or different things going on at the same time. So I have asked, and I'm saying it because I have asked, that in the future, Mr. give you a time frame, but not be as specific with the timing, so that you're not expecting, unless you specifically want something done in a certain period of time, then of course that's your privilege, so that he can work with staff, just so that it's not a hindrance on them and causing more trouble for them, where they're, Carol's got 2 audits, the Auditor General's in there, the DE, the Department of Education is in there, now Tom's coming in there trying to do something, where we could wait 2 or 3 or 4 weeks and then do the same thing and accomplish that much more.
That's what happened in the payroll audit last year.
Right, right, right. Okay, Mark, you look like you've still got it on your mind.
Well, I mean, I guess I'm unsure of what this is really going to look like going forward. If there is going to be a certain amount of information that does not get to us as a board
You can
anymore.
always get any information that you need.
And so I guess that's going to be more proactive conversation to get it. I guess where I struggle on this is that if performance observations are going through the superintendent first, not all of those are going to get to us. And I think there's a level of accountability that gets lost when that happens.
May I ask the question, what do you mean when you use the words performance evaluations? I just want to make sure that we're all clear on that terminology.
Performance, I think we've been using that throughout the.
You mean when he sees a function,
sees a
not
process
an
of-
individual's performance, but
Not
just
an
a function
individual's
of...
performance, because I mean that,
Okay.
that really gets more
Okay.
into personnel issues.
Right.
But I'm talking about a process or an inefficiency out there, or ineffective results from, pick a program, that kind of stuff. Whereas any other district employee, they pick up the phone, and we hear from teachers, we hear from secretaries, bookkeepers, bus drivers, principals, assistant principals. They all tell us this stuff. But, why would he have a wall around him just because his statute says financial records, but he's still got to be able to tell us, here's 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Even though the superintendent doesn't want him to tell us 1 and 2.
Well, I don't think that's what we're saying. I want to be clear that I'm not putting words into the superintendent's mouth. I'm not saying the superintendent is going to quash any finding. I'm saying that I think it's, as the senior management representative of the district, it's incumbent on the auditor to discuss their findings with her and get her comments on it. Because there may be a plausible explanation as to why, because he's not in that department. What I think the best thing might be to do is, if you have the time, let him brief you on it, one-on-one, if you have the time. I know it's a lot to ask, you have to do it 5, 6 times, but until he gets a feel for what you're really looking for, because I am not, and I want to say this very publicly, I am not in favor or I'm not proposing anybody quashing any finding
Right.
by the district auditor. All we're saying is that the district auditor should be financial based to start with. And if he's not financial based, he's performance based, then his findings will come to you. I mean, in the performance of his duties, anything he finds that's for the benefit of the district needs to come to you. I think that we're all clear on that, right, Tom?
Yep. Yeah, so one of the things I was going to say a little bit earlier was, and this comes from, obviously, when I was out in business, but, there's many things that as auditors, when we're out there doing our audit work, we see. And in the business world, a lot of times we discuss those with management. Now, that's good because we're discussing them, we're telling them what we're seeing and where some of the control weaknesses might be. However, because we didn't do the audit, we didn't test them in that area, we just advised management. Where that has come back around on us sometimes is, I think as you were saying, you might get information about something, you'll say, Tom, you were just out there doing an audit, weren't you, about 2 months ago? Did you see this? And I'll be like, well, yeah. And you say, well, why didn't you put it in the report? And I'll say, I discussed it with management. If I happen to see it, or I might just say, I didn't see anything on that, or that didn't come up. But I've had it in the business world where management has come to us where there might have been something that fell apart, and then they come back and say, Tom, didn't you see that? And I said, yes, we saw some issues around that. We discussed them with management. Then they get upset, well, why weren't they disclosed in the report? Well, we didn't audit them. There wasn't enough information to put them in the report. So I just want to say that up front. I'm not saying that there is anything, But, you know, I remember when I did maintenance, there was a lot of things I discussed with maintenance. And I think, Mr. Mathias, you and I were having a discussion about that. And I said, well, I discussed a lot of things with management when I was in the fields, things that I saw, but I didn't audit. They were just from the business world. And I said, you know, I see some things here I think you can make some improvements on, you know, but they didn't make it to the report. Does that make sense? So, not that those are going to come back around, but there was a lot of things that I saw and I discussed while in the field, if that makes sense. So, and since then, I've tried not to do that. I tried to focus, if there was an issue, I tried to really focus a little bit in on the work. You know, do I need to do maybe more increase my sample sizes? Yeah. I mean, I definitely can say, you know, there was a deficiency, at least in one case, where, you know, there probably wasn't enough people sampled. You know, maybe we should have expanded that. When it wasn't looking good, you know, maybe we should have increased the population to see, well, you know, there is more than one segment here. There, you know, if we go back to the teacher survey, you know, there were different pieces in that. And when I surveyed, I don't think I got all the pieces in that, so.
I think that, again, let's stay focused on the financial component to this. I like the idea of observations being written down as a process review, and that they would be answered discussed and answered with Tom, you having the authority to say, I think this is important enough, it needs to be included moving, and I want it part of the document, and that you should feel comfortable that you have that authority.
And I can discuss it with the audit committee.
That's correct, right? So I think that answers
Yes.
everyone's concern.
Yes.
Any other comments?
No.
Amazing presentation. Okay, we're done.
Thank you.
Mr. Johnson, do you have any comments?
Thanks.
Are we on the right track?
I think Mr. Mathias's idea of having a review of each scope of work before will allow me to provide you an opinion about whether or not that falls within something he's going to do.
Thank
I mean,
you.
there has to be some level of trust that Mr. Mock's going to do the audit that he's supposed to do, and that he's not out doing other things just to have additional items to report one way or the other. But I will tell you, I didn't agree with everything Mr. Benny said about what he could and couldn't do, but we don't have to worry about that. We're going to deal with it one audit at a time, so that should take care of it. I think that's the best possible alternative.
Okay. So there's your legal information. Anything else? Okay. Moving on. Dr. Moxley, oh, it's actually Steve.
Actually, Mr. Johnson. Thank you,
Thank you, Mr. Benny.
I think everybody's got before you two contracts. I saw Mr. Williams come in. I knew, oh, there he is.
Freddie?
They haven't had an opportunity to review them, I'm sure, by now and offer anything. We're just bringing them to you in case we want to do anything differently with what we've got. The first one, the contract for sale of the real property, is the form that Fred prepared. It has two fairly unique provisions in it after discussion. Oh, by the way, the 176,800 is the number that was one half of the demolition plus the commission, real estate commission is where that number came from.
And the dates throughout here are not correct, right? This is just a
Yes,
working document?
yes.
Okay.
Where is it? It's, I think page 7, maybe? No, 6, paragraph 28. It has the deed that will contain a reverter clause that the construction has to be commenced within 24 months and be completed no less than 18 months after that. And then it has the second contingency in the second paragraph that this contract is contingent upon the entry into a separate written agreement, which we're going to talk about in just a minute. Other than that, I think it's fairly straightforward. There had been some question about the property that is currently going through the the due diligence process, there was a discovery of potential an easement that would be across it. It appears that the sewer line that the city believed was right in the middle of the playground area out front seems to look like to be abandoned. So that might be cut off and might not cause any problem of moving forward with it. They're still looking at that. That hasn't been resolved yet. There has been, to my knowledge, no statement of any type from the buyer to date that that would create a problem or that they were any consideration of not going forward with the closing. The other document that you have with you is the agreement for contractor services. The body of it is essentially the same as we use for a lot of different contractor services. The meat is all in Exhibit A, which is the services that are being provided. And Ms. Brandenburg pointed out to me that I used the wrong number. I used the number that was the number for the real estate contract. This one was, I forget what that number is, but if you take what the total offer from the dentist was for the entire property, you subtract out what the dentist is paying for their piece of property and subtract out what the boys club is paying under the real estate contract, that number ends up being somewhere around $200,000, I think. 208, okay. I apologize for that. I was just reading that other contract and I had that number on the brain.
Staff and I were looking at that earlier. We kind of wondered where it came from.
Well, if you'd looked at the other contract, you would have seen. The concept here was how to make this as straightforward and as non-labor intensive as possible, not only for the boys club, but for the school board as well. What we came up with was essentially this agreement says that there are 4 programs that are operated by the Boys and Girls Club. They're in the 3rd paragraph: Project Learning, Power Hour, Money Matters, and Career Launch. And those will be educational services that will be created by or provided by the club. In order to determine what the value of those services are, we need an approximate cost per student per hour, and the approximate number of student hours that will be used to take those particular courses. So they're blank percentages yet because we haven't had a chance to discuss the specifics with the Boys and Girls Club yet, but what we have in mind is that they will provide us information on what percentage of students in their program will take 1 hour or 2 hours of these programs on any given day. It could be whatever number. Let's assume for a minute it's 50%. Then we have come up with a discussion and a decision that $10 would represent approximately the value for one student for 1 hour of this supplementary educational services. So if you have 50% of all the kids take 1 hour, just the 1 hour, then you multiply 50%, let's say you have 200 kids, so you'd multiply 100 times the $10 times the number of days that they had provided services that month. Then we have a separate number for 2 hours, what percentage of the kids take 2 hours worth of educational services. And then we have 2 separate categories for summer or non-school day services. Because during the summer program, there are more services offered than there are, and we assume that kids will be more involved in some of these programs, and some of the programs we assume there'll be less. So what all that accomplishes is that all we have to have from the Boys and Girls Club at the end of the month is 2 numbers. One number for kids who are attending the after-school service and one number for the kids who are attending the all-day services. We'll have those, and then with the percentages and the dollar amount, we'll be able to plug that into a formula and come up with essentially what is the value of those services to the school district. That number will be subtracted from the total of 208,200 until it equals 0. And in that manner, the Boys and Girls Club will provide for those services. They'll pay that difference in the cost of the property that we are not getting because we split it in half and had the Boys and Girls Club get half of it. And we really don't have to do a lot of machinations every month to come up with the number that we need to end up with to calculate. I have built into it that at the end of every year or before the next year, we'll sit down with the Boys and Girls Club and confirm with them that we still believe that the $10 is still a legitimate number that we should be using for what the cost of that service is. That could go up or down. And that the percentages that we're using for the kids taking 1 and 2 hours, depending upon the different programs, is still a legitimate, valid number, that hasn't changed significantly enough to be able to change the contract provisions.
Steve, does it say in here, I mean, you tried to make it as less cumbersome as can be, but who will actually monitor those reports monthly? Dr. Moxley, I mean, does it come back to you?
It will come back
To
to our
finance,
finance department because we will keep the amount in the ledger for the credits.
Okay. So it's an added task for someone in finance.
Should be, I mean,
Yeah.
you should get 2 numbers at the end of the month and have a pretty quick, if it takes more than 10 minutes to do the calculation, then somebody needs to go back
Okay,
and math for us.
just wanted it answered, okay. Comments? Roseanne?
I do.
This is a workshop, so we can get out whatever we need.
Workshop. Board, back on September 14th, when this was voted upon, I had talked to the superintendent and asked her if we could get a copy of the study that the Boys and Girls Club was having performed. Because we met on the 14th, on the 16th, the Boys and Girls Club had a board meeting, and then they decided that they wanted to have the Dabney property without listening to what the city of Leesburg was going to offer to them at their board meeting on September 28th. And so the superintendent had asked Mr. Johnson to get a copy of the study along with some financial information, and that never came before us. And so on October 27th, I sent Freddie Williams an email asking if we could receive a copy of the study. And he called me and said that it was an internal document. And I said, but you were the ones that had shared with us that you were having this study performed. And I thought to be able to share the information, it could help us look at all of our schools in Leesburg and the numbers that their consultant came up with. He sent me an email back asking me to answer some questions. I did that within moments of receiving his email, and then he said that as soon as he receives the information, he will present the request to his board. And as of this meeting, I've not heard anything back, and I guess I do not understand why we cannot get a copy of the study that a consultant did pertaining to the students and the demographics in the Leesburg area. So, which gives me pause and concern as to why can't we see it?
Comments? Mr. Mathias?
First of all, I have no interest in seeing the study.
Well, I do.
You're making it sound like the board wants to see it. I'm just saying, I don't want to see it.
Well, I'm
So-
sharing that I want to see it, and as a board member, and that being my area, and being responsible to the taxpayers, I think that if a study was performed, that we should be able to review it. For those who want to review it, I being one of them.
And what are you trying to ascertain? When the Boys and Girls Club, as an entity, they had a choice between a piece of property that was going to be donated by the city, and they had the Dabney property. And at their expense, they went out and did, and then authorized a study to be done. The study was presented to their board that 100% approved it, the site, Dabney. What part are you overstepping into their business? I don't understand what your motive is.
I don't feel like I'm overstepping anything. If they have done a study, taking a look at where the students are located in the Leesburg schools, taking a look at where the demographics are, and where they would be pulling the students from, I think that that would be helpful information for this school district to have, and I, as a board member, I would like to see that information. And since that time, I don't think that 100% of their board is still in agreement, with the Dabney property being the prime location. What concerns me also is that there was another piece of property that the city of Leesburg was going to donate right next to the gymnasium, where the Boys and Girls Club could access that gymnasium for various activities. And they never even wanted to hear that, that option. They were the ones that had asked to have until October 12th to come back to us. And this took place even before September 28th. So I would just like to see a copy of the study, and it gives me reservation as to why we can't see it, or why I can't see it.
Well, again, in response, Roseanne, this is your district. I would think you would be intimate with the knowledge of where these students are going to come from, that you wouldn't need a study from the Boys and Girls Club for you to understand your district. So I think that we are overstepping by asking for that study that was again commissioned by the Boys and Girls Club. If you want to commission a study, go commission and pay for it, and you can have the study. And I think we're overstepping the intent of the agreement and where our spirit is. They weren't going to do a study until the city came forward after we had discussed Dabney, by the way, and that was so that they would be good stewards. And they were good, and that study came out and was presented to their board privately. I've never seen it, by the way, but I understand it was 100% of their board voted for the Dabney site based on the study, regardless of their reservations. And I would hope at some point you get on board with the rest of the board.
Well, and that is your opinion, Mr. Mathias, and I have my opinion as well.
Stephanie?
I also was given some information about the board being split on the vote and where they wanted the property site. And I called Mr. Williams, and he did call me back and sent me the numbers, the voting numbers, and they go with what Mr. Mathias said, that 100% of his board, with one abstaining, voted for the Dabney property. Because I was concerned also when I heard the board was split on where to put the property. It would only seem right to call and say, okay, now what's going on with the board? And he did, Mr. Williams said that 100% of the board voted for the Dabney property after the study was presented. I don't know, I haven't seen the study either, but it made me feel better after hearing what I had heard.
Okay, Mr. Dodd.
Well, yeah, Mr. Williams and I had a conversation after the property was chosen, and he gave me some highlights of what drove the decision. But I mean, I'm not sure that we necessarily need an internal study if that is necessarily our purview. I don't think the Boys and Girls Club is approaching this and picking the Dabney property just to spite you or anybody else on this board. I'm confident in their mission, and I'm confident in the performance that they're going to do. And at this point, I just don't know, why we continue to get this riled up in negativity. Instead, we should be embracing the partnership and be ready to move forward. We looked at the documents, and we've corrected the number for educational services. So I'm looking forward to this being on a future agenda to vote on.
Okay. Roseanne, you have anything else?
Well, I had a phone call that same day asking if that person could get me to back off on this. So I found that to be rather interesting, which just added to my question of not being able to see a study that's been performed.
And I understand why you want to see the study. I'm just going to, so that this is disclosed. I talked to 2 different city commissioners, and they were pushing toward the fact that they were offering a piece of property free. They were letting me know that that was available. Then I also heard from 2 board members of the Boys and Girls Club, which I used to sit on for 8 years, and they said what Miss Stephanie Luke just said, that they weren't 100%, that after all this had done, they may have voted that way that night, but that is not where after the property came out with the city of Leesburg, that is not where their vote would be. So, there's so much going on out there. I just wanted to workshop before I'm not in charge, so we could get all this out in the open and find out where we're going to be. And yes, Mr. Dodd, it will be on an agenda, I'm sure, when the superintendent works with the new chairman. Dr. Moxley.
At this point in time, I believe, Mr. Johnson, we're waiting to hear back from the Boys and Girls Club.
I just
and-
want to make sure that the concept, as outlined, it's a little different, but is that concept of how we're going to credit money against a number with the educational services, if that's okay with everybody, or somebody may want to do it differently.
The concept's good. I have no problem with that.
That's great. So then we will, what will drive which agenda comes on in the future will be driven based on when we hear back from the Boys and Girls Club.
Mr. Williams, you are in the audience. Would you like to say anything, or just you wanted to listen?
I'm just listening, but I just like to say that
You have to come up here and get on the mic. Sorry.
finding a cold, so I apologize if I cough in the mic.
We've all had one, I think.
Again, I'd like to say that we're very excited for the partnership with the school district, being able to expand the partnership to the point of the study. It was an internal document, gave the highlights. When we looked at the demographic data, the amount of money it costs for site work, and where our current students are, but most importantly to where our constituents, the parents of the city of Leesburg in that particular club, they said that they'd like for us to be at Dabney. It was a pleasure working with Dr. Moxley and her staff and being able to put together the agreement. One thing I would like to add is, as a partner, it's a give and take. And one thing, a frustration from my standpoint is, the first question was, you didn't want, the school district had reservations because of impact fees. Impact fees, and the county commission went before them. Then the question was the penny sales tax and whether or not the constituents and the voters saw issues with this. That passed. And then now it's something else as small as an internal document that we use to help guide a business decision. And at one point, are we going to be able to put all the negativity aside and be able to work in what's best for the interests of our kids in Lake County? They deserve it, and we're looking forward to being able to strengthen that partnership and move past that. So, thank you.
Thank you very much for being here. Okay.
We have 3 actionable items. The first,
Yes, ma'am. Keep
the
going.
first one is the resolution on the district cost differential. This is the draft that Mrs. McLeod, I think, brought when Mr. Matthias brought up the topic. We have it in our format, and we've got our amounts in there. And so I am recommending approval of Resolution 2015-14 with regards to the DCD part of the FEFP formula.
Okay, you've heard the superintendent's recommendation. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
I give it to Roseanne, Bill and Roseanne. Any questions or comments? I want to thank Bill for working with Carol and with the superintendent and with Larry Metz. And let's see if we can get this done.
Great. And so I know, Mrs. Luke, you're going on Wednesday, so we'll make sure
Yeah,
whatever
no, we're going
copies
to.
you want, we can get those for
Can we
you.
vote on
All in
that?
favor?
Oh, sorry.
Aye.
Aye. I'm dragging it out.
Can I get the electronic copy?
Yes.
It's probably on
Yes.
Board Docs.
Yes.
I'm good.
Yes. We'll take,
just
you
won't
know,
say
we'll
draft.
take
Take the
draft off of
Tallahassee
it.
with you,
Yeah.
that would be great.
We'll make sure that that gets emailed to you tomorrow.
Thank you.
Okay, the next item is the approval of the MPO interlocal agreement. This is a interlocal agreement from the,
MPO, the Metropolitan Planning Organization.
yes,
Go ahead.
yes, Ms. Stivender.
You're formalizing the results of continuing our partnership with the MPO and the cities and the county. The Lake County School Board has a non-voting seat at the table, and we were added so that we could be an active partner, so we knew what was going on with school-related issues. This is where the safe schools and the bike paths and those type things have come up, so you want to do the recommendation?
Yes, I am concerned about what is in front of them right at the moment, because you have a copy of the resolution.
Yes.
You need the interlocal agreement.
I'm sure,
it's in-
Mr. Johnson, have
it's
you
in-
reviewed it?
It's
the
in,
same one that was done.
it's in board,
Right now, this says
No.
it's adding something else.
No, this is,
Sumter County's already been in, it's like Sumter MPO.
that's the resolution. There's an interlocal agreement, and I am concerned that, that's not at your place right now. It is the same interlocal agreement we did in previous years
Yes.
with the, change in the date, but, well, I'm not sure what is at their place. I guess we're going to need to,
Stanley didn't have it, all right.
Okay.
okay. May we, put this, to the next meeting on the December meeting? I'm sorry.
Sure. I
I
don't know
just
if it's
noticed
time
what-
sensitive getting back to them or not.
Okay.
Is the only difference that we have the wrong date?
Yes, but it's the same document.
No.
No, it's the same document we approved last year.
Yeah, this is what I got, 2 pages.
This is
Yeah,
a
but we-
resolution. This is not the document.
Oh.
We can't approve
Okay.
without having at least
All right.
looked at it.
Postpone it then.
Yep.
Got it.
Okay.
I didn't.
May I see this back? Thank you. I'm looking to see if there is a date certain on this.
We usually have the annual meeting in December or January, so I know it had to be,
That's what's on board now.
I know.
I've read that.
Okay, it will come back to you on the next, meeting that we have where you're permitted to take action. And we will make sure that the electronic version of that gets emailed to you. Okay. All right, the last item is the approval of the strategic priorities. I distributed an updated copy that had corrections on it at our last board meeting. This is coming since that was, not on the agenda for that meeting. We made those corrections, so at this time, I'd like to recommend approval of the strategic priorities as presented.
You've heard the superintendent's recommendation. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any questions? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you very much. Okay, board member comments. Ms. Luke?
I had a question on here, and Dr. Moxley, this was not on one of my comments from
Sure,
today. I know
sure.
we, the Umatilla City pool area.
Yes, I will get an update on that. Oh, do you have an update on that? I know the staff has been working with them on that.
Thank you.
Mhm.
I noticed that the cooker was moved.
Yeah.
Yes.
The smoker.
Was removed.
Thank you for that update.
Yes. We met with the city manager a couple of weeks ago, and he and I met with Besh, who is our surveying contractor. We actually put pins in the ground and agreed on where the location of the boundary was going to be. Besh was out there and surveyed it. Currently, right now, we're waiting for the legal description and the survey so that we can send that back to him for some conference to make sure that we've all agree on the same thing once the survey comes back to us. I told him at that point we'd work with Mr. Johnson on a lease agreement, because one of the things that we agreed to do is not only, several years ago, apparently, we had a handshake agreement regarding the parking on the east side of the pool. That was never formalized. I talked to Mr. Ritter about that, and so what we're doing is we're incorporating all of it at the same time, and we had it surveyed, and they seem to be fine with that. So I'm hoping to get the survey back within the next week. We'll get with Mr. Johnson on a lease agreement that'll fit whatever the standard board lease agreement is. We'll send that over so that he can review that with the city council, and at that point, we can move forward.
Thank you. Thank you. That's all.
Okay. Mark?
Well, I had a great opportunity this week to witness the talent that is in Lake County schools. As I was, oh my goodness, I can't possibly rave enough about East Ridge High School's production of Beauty and the Beast. These kids and their teachers were incredibly talented and dedicated and devoted. And I don't know how they put together such a professional production, but it was something I will rave about for a very, very long time. So that was certainly phenomenal. And then Windy Hill Middle School this week, their Junior National Honor Society put on a 5K, which was fantastic. I had an opportunity to run in that one. And then yesterday, the thrill of volunteering at the Renaissance Fair was also a blast, working alongside the number of our different culinary students from different schools. Once again, a true testament to the talent And I had a number of conversations with some of those students, which, you know, I think we're probably fairly limited on time today, so I'll share some of those things in a future set of comments. When I read the article about teacher retention in this county, certainly I think that there is not enough that we can do to keep that issue at our forefront. And today I had the opportunity to visit Lake Tech, and Dr. Culpepper had given me a document entitled "The Ever-Increasing Burden on America's Public Schools," and it's pretty. I almost have to stand up for us to see it, you know, and it kind of highlights through the century, if you will, of how many extracurricular things have been put on teachers that they have to try to include in their instruction. And I thought, well, gee, I wonder why teachers are overburdened. And couple that with, you know, my remarks in the paper were about the bell schedule, and I think it was really a significant mistake this district made a couple of years ago when it sacrificed teacher planning time for that bell schedule. And I know I've mentioned a couple of times the struggles that were associated with that by losing all that time and now being expected to plan more lessons but have less time to plan those lessons. It really decreases the quality of the instruction that's being delivered. So I guess my question is moving forward, and it's kind of in response to Orange County. Their school board decides the bell schedule. Is that something that we're willing to put in front of our board, or is that something that remains with administration to set those bell schedules?
That bell schedule was part of the strategic finance plan and instructional priorities that will come back before this board. And we have a whole work team on it.
Okay, that's good news. And then finally, I've been really wrestling with this over the past week, and you know, I really don't want to save it till December, and that's the amount of thought I've put into the compensation packages that were put before us last week, and not only the decisions that we made as a board, but also the process to get there. And I think the process perhaps is where I've got maybe some of the greatest struggle there, and I guess I want to just throw out you know, maybe an item of feedback to consider as we walk through that process again. We didn't see those documents where they weren't posted until the Friday afternoon before the meeting, and I know that those decisions were made well in advance because we've talked about them through the context of the strategic finance plan, that there were administrative salary increases, and also through the general operating budget where we also saw there were administrative salary increases. But I guess where I really had the emotional struggle here is that it's no fault of these district employees that they're paid very well compared to the administrators throughout the state. And it would certainly be a significant morale killer if they were to see that there are proposed raises for them on the agenda and then that gets voted down, especially after not having had those raises for 8 years. And I guess that for me this went back to a question of equality versus equity. And this is where I would put the recommendation out there that in the future when we consider compensation, that we try to look at it as part of a whole comprehensive planning context. That, you know, yes, the 3.5% was in line with what we did for LCEA, but looking at the disparity when, you know, teachers are at 48th out of 67, and your secretaries are at 64th, clerks at 61st, data entry folks at 58th, teachers' aides at 61st, and then you've got your high school principal at 13th, middle school at 12th, and elementary at 17th. 3.5% perhaps probably shouldn't have been the answer to be an across-the-board number. And I think back to when we were originally given a pot of money and we were told as a board, this is the amount of money you have some discretion over. And among that, we had to pick teacher salaries, courtesy busing, and the academic tutors. I think the other components of that should have been the other salary pieces. So that way, in context, we could have said, well, perhaps some groups 3.5% is reasonable, but other groups, especially when you're like 64th and 61st, it doesn't make any sense to do 3.5%. That perhaps some of those percentages would have been a little bit different to try and get some of these salaries more in line with that. And so, you know, I guess that's my recommendation, my hope going forward.
Thank you for your comments. Ms. Brandenburg.
I'm good.
Mr. Mathias.
Just one. And I just want to acknowledge my mom and my sister that are passing through.
Ah.
That's all I've got.
I smiled at them because they were so nice and quiet when they came in. I didn't know they were your mom. Now, this is the one that retired after how many years? 40 years? Stand up. Thank you. Okay, you want to stand up too, sister? Okay. Okay, why do they have red hair and you don't?
Yeah, it's passed over. I got another sister with red hair.
Okay, just thought I'd ask. I've only got a couple of comments, and then we'll move on to the next. I did attend the Astatula Elementary presentation for Veterans Day on Tuesday, and the kindergarten and first graders, they are the cutest little things. There were quite a few in the audience that were grandparents that were in the military. They put on a great performance. And the other thing is, it has been an honor to be the chairman for the last 2 years for this board. We've had some trying times, and we will continue to have them, but we've had some great times. And we've accomplished a lot in the last 2 years, I do believe, and look forward to doing that in the next year. But thank you very much for the honor of being the chairman for the last 2 years, and I look forward to the next 4 or 5. Thank you. Dr. Moxley.
I have no comments, thank you.
Mr. Attorney. Ms. Challenger. You don't want to say anything? I like it when you talk. Okay, this meeting is adjourned, and we will take about a 5-minute recess until our next meeting.